AEW World Champion Jon Moxley has signed a new 5-year contract extension. We've got all of the details on that, and actually that he was working without a contract for a brief period of time and was working on a handshake deal per AEW. We've got all the details on that. Plus, could his wife, Renee Paquette, also be set to sign a contract with AEW? Plus, Frankie Kazarian, an AEW wrestler, currently holds an Impact Championship from Bound for Glory last night. Samoa Joe and Wardlow, what are the plans for them? And an All-Atlantic Championship match has been announced for next week's edition of Dynamite. Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there are plenty of news stories to get into in the world of All Elite Wrestling. And even though there was a live Rampage last night, there was a live edition of Battle of the Belts, the biggest stories, once again, are what is happening outside of AEW, what's happening off the screen, outside of the ring right now. The biggest story at the moment is the brand new signing of a new deal for AEW World Champion Jon Moxley. This kind of came out of nowhere, to be honest, last night. It really did come out of nowhere. And it must be said, it's got some really interesting details. So let's get straight into it. The big news story in the world of All Elite Wrestling is that the AEW World Champion is going to be sticking around for 5 more years. If Jon Moxley sees out his AEW contract, which for all intents and purposes he should, and he probably will, he'd have been on AEW television longer than he would have been on WWE television as Dean Ambrose, which goes to show how long this contract is. And there's also some really interesting developments on his role in AEW going forward, not just as a talent, but also now as a coach, as a mentor, and his availability to work dates outside of All Elite Wrestling as well. So let's get into this press release. It was a big press release yesterday saying that AEW CEO, General Manager, and Head of Creative Tony Khan announced that AEW World Champion has signed a 5-year contract extension. This ensures that one of professional wrestling's top stars will remain in All Elite Wrestling through 2027, while expanding his responsibilities to include mentoring and coaching talent. Moving forward, Moxley will work exclusively for AEW and its international partners, including New Japan Pro Wrestling, where he is a 2-time IWGP United States Heavyweight Champion. Moxley has had an incredible run in 2022, most recently recapturing the AEW World Championship at AEW Dynamite Grand Slam against Bryan Danielson, pitting the Blackpool Combat Club's top stars against one another for the grandest prize in professional wrestling. He defends the AEW World Championship next against Hangman Adam Page in his hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio on October 18th in a special Tuesday edition of AEW Dynamite live on TBS. Moxley, as I mentioned, kicked off action last night on the live episode of Rampage, featuring that Battle of the Belts the following hour as well. Now, this is what AEW President Tony Khan has had to say. Quote, Jon Moxley is on the best run of his already legendary career, and this 5-year extension ensures that he was not only here for AEW's meteoric rise, but he also remains a key part of the sustained success we're witnessing. Just days after the 3-year anniversary show for AEW Dynamite, Khan said, Jon is a great world champion for us in his 3rd reign. His wrestling mind is invaluable, and our roster is lucky to have the opportunity to utilize him as a mentor and as a coach as we continue to build the stars of today and tomorrow. Moxley has had something to say as well. He said, quote, I love AEW and the spirit of both the company and its fans. I cherish our shared passion for the sport of professional wrestling, and I'm going to dedicate everything I have in mind, body, and spirit to helping AEW be the best it can be going forward. So that was the press release, and by reading the press release, you would have assumed it was relatively straightforward. Moxley, certainly the franchise player for AEW, has been on and off, but certainly in lieu of all that's been going on at the moment with CM Punk being positioned as the top guy in AEW and then him getting injured and then him getting suspended and injured once again and seemingly now departing AEW, Moxley once again has been giving the ball as he has done several times this year, and frankly he's been AEW's MVP throughout the entirety of 2022, and he certainly earned this contract extension, there's no doubt about that. So you would have assumed it was relatively straightforward, but maybe not as straightforward as we had previously first thought, because details have now been revealed in the wake of a major announcement of Moxley extending his stay with AEW for 5 more years. But according to some reports, including PW Insider, the deal was signed around the All Out pay-per-view, but there were some shocking details revealed. According to PW Insider, at one point, Moxley's deal with AEW had actually expired, and he was working without a contract, and he was on a, quote, handshake agreement as a new deal was being finalized between both parties. Now, it seems there was very little concern internally that an extension wouldn't occur, as there was, quote, never any concern he might be looking to go elsewhere. The press release notes that Moxley will remain with AEW through 2027, and as I mentioned, his responsibilities have expanded and now include mentoring and coaching talent. Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp has provided a plethora of extra details on this. So as I mentioned, you've got the press release there. You've then got the details from PW Insider that say actually Moxley for a brief period of time, we don't really know how long, but certainly for a brief period of time, was working without a contract, was on a handshake deal. It wasn't much of a drama, as the expectation was he doesn't want to go elsewhere. He's not looking to go elsewhere. He just wants to make sure that for a big commitment like this, his biggest commitment he's ever made with AEW, he wants to ensure things are right. Because if you recall, when Moxley first came into AEW in 2019, debuts at Double or Nothing, he only signed a one-year deal at that period of time. And he had significant clauses that he could exit a year in if he wasn't happy, because AEW still was a bit of a risk during that period of time. And obviously, a year later, when that deal was coming up, he was the AEW World Champion. It wasn't a problem. He extended his stay for 2 more years. But this is the biggest contract he's ever signed with All Elite Wrestling, and possibly, you could argue, it might be the last contract he signs with All Elite Wrestling. Who knows what Moxley will want to be doing in 5 years' time. Now, Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful Select has provided new details with Moxley signing this 5-year deal through 2027. Several sources have indicated to Fightful that Moxley had been working at some point without a contract. However, Fightful are saying that they haven't actually confirmed that, but that is also what they have heard, similar to what PW Insider was also reporting. However, when Fightful repeatedly asked about his contract status throughout the summer, they were told it was, quote, quite a situation, and they were also told that AEW would do whatever it took to keep him with the company for the rest of his career, which is, as I mentioned, why this contract is so long. Now, it goes without saying that AEW has worked to make a big investment in Moxley, and it could argue that now he might have superseded the likes of CM Punk as the highest paid person on the AEW roster. We know those names in the top bracket were CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, Adam Cole, those people that have signed more recently with AEW once the money came in after the television deal in early 2020. We now know that with this renegotiated contract, maybe not an extension, but certainly a renegotiation of a contract with MJF, he would be up there. I wouldn't suspect he was above getting what CM Punk was and possibly still is getting. Bryan Danielson, again, would be in that top bracket. One would assume with Moxley's star power, with his history, with his legacy, he must be right up there, if not the highest paid guy in the company right now. That hasn't been reported, but as Sean Ross Sapp is saying, AEW has made a big investment in re-signing Moxley, especially for this long period of time. Now, an interesting aspect of the deal was that it was mentioned Moxley would exclusively wrestle for AEW and its international partners, including New Japan Pro Wrestling. Of course, he's made several appearances for New Japan since signing with AEW, and that will continue. However, he's also wrestled regularly outside of AEW during this time period as well. Most notably, he's wrestled for GCW, Revolver, and he's made appearances for NEW as well. Now, AEW reportedly wouldn't comment on what this meant for his status with any of those other companies, and when they reached out to GCW Fightful, they weren't even aware of this press release until it happened. So it's not a case of Moxley cluing GCW in, and they're not really sure what it means for his status there. Interestingly, Moxley is actually scheduled for a title versus career match with Nick Gage tonight. So we could see a situation, I would assume, where Moxley loses against Nick Gage, and possibly maybe that spells an end for Moxley's run, even though it's not his career on the line, it's Nick Gage's career on the line. I don't know. But in addition, it was stated that Moxley's role would expand into coaching and mentoring. Moxley recently has really been brought up into a leader-like figure and certainly a coach-like presence for a lot of AEW talent. He helped lead a talent meeting after All Out that was positively received. He led it with the likes of Bryan Danielson and Chris Jericho. Now, not that it's much surprise that it was positively received, but most of the talent that Fightful have heard from and spoken to have spoken highly of Moxley's influence and how much weight his words have actually carried with them. They've also heard that the Moxley-led talent meetings, along with Chris Jericho and Bryan Danielson, were very well received. So it's a big story, certainly. Their AEW World Champion has committed for the foreseeable future for 5 years, possibly the rest of his career. I think Moxley's going to wrestle longer than 5 years, but certainly it's a big investment by AEW. I think it's a bit of positive news in a time where there hasn't been a lot of positive news. And it certainly cements now Moxley's the guy. Moxley's the number one guy. And he had been in the early 2 years of AEW, Moxley was the top babyface. He was positioned as the top babyface. There's no doubt about it. Even as Jericho being the first AEW World Champion, Moxley was the first babyface AEW World Champion. And you look at all of the talent they had on the roster during that period of time, Cody Rhodes, Kenny Omega, etc. Moxley was still positioned as the top guy. Moxley losing to CM Punk clean this year, I think is the first time someone's cleanly defeated Jon Moxley in singles action in something ridiculous like 3 years. He has one of those protected records in AEW history. He's always been positioned as a top guy. Now, with the introduction of CM Punk, of Bryan Danielson last year, and possibly with the personal stuff that was going on in his life at the time. We know he was having issues with addiction and alcohol at the time. He did slip down the card a little bit. He was tagging with Eddie Kingston. He was more involved in sort of upper mid-card stuff, and he was involved in that kind of aspect of programming. But in 2022, there has been nobody that has been as good and as reliable and, frankly, Mr. AEW than Jon Moxley. He has, ever since he returned at the beginning of this year. His first appearance was in January of this year after exiting rehab. He cut that fantastic promo on Dynamite, even when someone called him out or heckled him in the ring and he dropped the F-bomb on television. Ever since then, it's just been banger after banger after banger. Good match after good match, good program after good program, whether it's facing Bryan Danielson, teaming up with CM Punk initially, having that feud with Danielson, leading to the introduction of William Regal and the Blackpool Combat Club, then transitioning into, obviously, Punk getting injured as well, because that was part of it too. Punk got injured, and then who stepped up? At a time that AEW really needed someone to step up, at a time there was a lot of chaos, not so much backstage. I guess it kind of was going on at the time, but it was bubbling, it was simmering. At a time they needed someone to step in and main event a massive pay-per-view, one of the biggest pay-per-views in AEW's history, Forbidden Door, a crossover event to slot into that main event in the United Center against Tanahashi. Jon Moxley did that. He slotted in, wrestled Tanahashi, had a fantastic match, became the interim AEW World Champion, carried the World Championship over the summer. In those summer months when CM Punk was away, CM Punk came back, and Moxley still held his own, and he did business. He did the favors to Punk, even though they did that match on Dynamite, which in retrospect probably wasn't the best thing to do, especially now that Punk isn't with the company. But still, you could argue Moxley beat Punk once, so actually coming out of it, at least he had a victory over Punk. Nevertheless, he did business in the right way All Out in Chicago, and then what happens when Punk gets injured and suspended and all of that stuff goes down? Moxley was meant to be taking a few weeks off. He was meant to be going on vacation. And he was going to return at this Tuesday Night Dynamite in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's when he was going to be making his comeback. Instead, because Kenny Omega was gone, because CM Punk was gone, because the Young Bucks were gone, Tony Khan picked up the phone and said, we need you. We need star power. We're going to be doing a tournament. We're going to be doing this, that, and the other. Moxley was there. He wins the tournament. And now he's going to be feuding with MJF. And seemingly, he's probably going to be doing the favors to MJF as well, because he's going to be making a star when he puts over MJF and MJF wins the AEW World Championship. Moxley is the guy in AEW. And I know that for whatever reason, Jon Moxley is somewhat divisive on social media, that some people don't like the way he wrestles matches, or some people don't like his style, or he bleeds too much or whatever, and they're fair criticisms. You can't fault the guy's work ethic, you can't fault the guy's work rate, and you can't fault the guy's dedication and his professionalism. And at a time where that isn't the standard in AEW, with all of this backstage drama and backstage BS that's going on, Jon Moxley set standard in AEW, and he's absolutely earned the contract that he's got. Again, we don't know the finer details when it comes to pay. I'm sure he's very well compensated, and frankly, he deserves it. So I think it's a great get for AEW because, to be honest, Moxley was never going to go back to WWE whilst Vince McMahon was there. Whilst Triple H is there, anything's possible now. Anything is possible, and even if, Moxley, I don't think Moxley would have been the guy to be working on a handshake deal and then go to WWE or anything like that. But if they hadn't come to terms and Moxley had gone back to WWE, which is entirely possible, and he'd have faced off against Roman Reigns because it's an opponent and the history is there, of course, that'd have massively hurt AEW. That's already happened to him this year with Cody Rhodes. So it's a big signing for AEW. They are hinging their future, really. They're putting their wagon back on the Jon Moxley vehicle. And to be honest, it hasn't hurt them this year. It's the right thing to do, most likely. So I think that's a big signing for AEW. But it might not just be Moxley that's signing with AEW. Renee Paquette may be the next name through the door in All Elite Wrestling. And this is quite big because Renee, by all accounts, has been a WWE target recently. According to Fightful Select, Sean Ross Sapp is reporting a WWE target could indeed be heading to AEW if talent in WWE has heard correctly. Now, Fightful is reporting and was told by WWE sources on Friday, just yesterday, that they believe Renee Paquette is headed to All Elite Wrestling. Now, initially, it was reported by Give Me Sports' Louis Dangor. He had heard that WWE had reached out to Renee about coming back to the company, which Fightful are yet to confirm, but it must be said it would be in line with what we've seen over the past week, over the past few days, with this big commentary shakeup in WWE and with interviewers such as Kathy Kelly coming back to the company. Logically, it would make sense that WWE would have reached out to Renee to bring her back to the company, whether in a presenting role, an interviewing role, or maybe back to commentary like she did on Raw back in 2018. But Fightful have yet to confirm that. Now, they have stated that they reached out to Renee and AEW, who have not confirmed the move at all. Now, Paquette spent nearly 8 years in WWE, finishing up following SummerSlam 2020. During her time with the company, she filled many roles, including backstage interviewer, hosting, commentator on Raw, and much more. She also hosted WWE Backstage, which aired on FS1. Since leaving WWE, she started her own podcast, The Sessions, which is part of Colin Cowherd's The Volume Network. She recently filmed WWE content for A&E Network specials and joined the Cincinnati Bengals broadcast team for a new show titled Renee All Day. Of course, she's married to Jon Moxley, who's just signed this 5-year extension, and logically, it must be said, if Moxley's going to be there for 5 years, it makes sense that Renee probably would be there and she would be working with him in the same company as him. I'm sure that the WWE offer, if there was one, would have been incredibly tempting, would have been incredibly financially lucrative. Working for Triple H, she's got a great relationship with him and she's got a great relationship with WWE. I believe she said at the time of her departure in 2020 that obviously, look, she wanted to start a family and she wanted to pursue outside projects that maybe she wouldn't be able to in WWE. But also, she spoke about what else was there for her to do in WWE, right? I mean, one of the biggest reasons I think she stuck around towards the end was she had this contract with Fox and she really, really wanted WWE Backstage to work. She liked that hosting role. She liked that kind of format. She'd done being an interviewer, and to go back to just being an interviewer felt somewhat like a step down. She didn't really want to go back to commentary. She said she didn't really enjoy it that much, even though I thought she was pretty good at it. So by that point, she'd kind of superseded just being an interviewer. So if she is going to AEW, I do wonder what that would involve. What would she do there? I don't want her just to be an interviewer, unless what AEW does do quite well is they do backstage interviews, but they have the in-ring segments all be interviews. Not many people just walk to the ring and cut a promo. Moxley kind of does that, but very few do. The rest are all interviews. They have the kind of Mean Gene role, which Tony Schiavone has filled in for, but sometimes he's racing around all over the place. So a natural successor to Schiavone in that Mean Gene role would be Renee Paquette. I mean, she's the best in the business at doing that, and that certainly would add an extra level to AEW's presentation. So If that is the case, that would also be a massive get for AEW. Of course, if we hear more details about that, we'll talk about that here on the channel. Frankie Kazarian has won an Impact Championship. At Impact Wrestling's pay-per-view Bound for Glory, Frankie Kazarian won the Impact X Division Championship by defeating Speedball Mike Bailey to emerge victorious. It was a good match, hard-hitting, enjoyable, worth a rewatch certainly. Kazarian and Bailey put on a vicious battle for the title. In the end, though, Kazarian was able to pick up the victory and the championship via submission after Bailey tapped out. Like I said, enjoyed the match. It must be said, Bound for Glory was an odd event last night because for Impact, which has in recent years featured prominently a load of young talent and really springboarded a ton of young talent, it was a show that was largely centered around veterans or people that had been with Impact Wrestling in the past. And I understand that because it's 20 years of Impact Wrestling this year, but I'm not sure some of those booking decisions were right, particularly the Bully Ray one. However, Frankie Kazarian, he's not doing anything in AEW. He might as well be in Impact Wrestling. And he's got obviously huge history with the X Division Championship. He might have won it the most times. I think Chris Sabin might have won more than him. I'm not sure. Maybe he's equaled that record now. So congratulations to Kazarian, and long may his Impact Wrestling appearances continue. Let's talk about Samoa Joe and Wardlow. Previously, there was some rumors or reports that Wardlow and Samoa Joe could be teaming up or could be having a situation whereby maybe Swerve and Our Glory would face off against Wardlow. But as it turns out, there were never plans for the two teams to collide last week. In a correction issued in this past week's Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave Meltzer revealed that there were never plans for an angle between Wardlow and Swerve and Our Glory on last week's episode of Dynamite. Of course, the assumption was that it didn't happen because of Hurricane Ian, and that put a stop to all that kind of stuff. But both teams reportedly were scheduled to be on the show, but Meltzer noted their plans didn't involve the teams interacting with each other. As I mentioned, Strickland, Wardlow, and Joe all missed last week's event due to Hurricane Ian, which of course was wreaking havoc in Florida at the time, a state known for housing many wrestlers. Joe and Wardlow would appear on Rampage in a video package previously taped for AEW's Road 2 series. So that wasn't actually part of the plan. That was a misreport that has since been corrected. Finally, next week, of course, AEW Dynamite is going to be in Canada for the first time. In addition to the other matches announced for the show, we also have another title match announced because Orange Cassidy will get another shot at PAC and the AEW All-Atlantic Championship on this coming Wednesday's edition of Dynamite when AEW makes its debut in Canada. This will be the fourth time that Cassidy and PAC have squared off in a one-on-one match. After PAC went back-to-back at Battle of the Bouts at Rampage last night, he successfully defended his championship against Trent Barretta at Battle of the Bouts 4. The King of Sloth Style made his first appearance on AEW TV since the Grand Slam edition of Dynamite. Cassidy made his way down to the ring and instantly engaged in a pull-apart brawl with PAC. Cassidy had been written off of TV for a few weeks after the Grand Slam show, of course, where PAC used the ringside bow hammer to defeat him, something which he also did last night as well. And I guess maybe they're teasing that Orange Cassidy now could possibly win the championship on this first ever Canadian edition of Dynamite. We'll have to wait and see. But there you go, guys. That's the latest AEW news for you. Let me know your thoughts on today's AEW news stories in the comment section below. Be sure to smash a like on the like button. Be sure to subscribe, bottom right-hand corner, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.